Good morning, my name is Gary. Welcome back to my shop. I started a project about 3 months ago to make an adapter so that I could put a slotting head onto my Cincinnati milling machine. And this was a teal head. I don't know what it was for, but when I bought it on eBay, I looked at it and I said, I think I can adapt that to use onto my Cincinnati, since I couldn't find a proper Cincinnati head for sale. So I made first 3 videos, went through a variety of turning operations, and hopefully today I'm going to be able to finish the adapter itself. This is one of 2 parts that I need to make the head work. So I've been away from the shop for the last couple months. My job normally doesn't have me do much traveling, but in this case I had several business trips. I also had a little bit of vacation in there. So one of the bigger challenges today for me is going to be trying to figure out how to run this thing again. It's been a little bit of time, been away from it. I don't have the luxury that some people have of working in the shop every day. This is just a hobby for me. What I'm going to be doing is doing some cuts with a 3/4 inch milling cutter and basically doing a couple slots on this. The cuts are in ductile iron, and when I take out my little calculator or a cheat sheet, realize I want to be doing this at about 250 RPM. The closest that I have on this machine, I have 215 or I have 310, so I'm going to go at 215 RPM. And then for a feed rate, 215 RPM, if I go 4.5 inches a minute with a 4-tooth cutter, that ought to give me about 5/1000ths of an inch per cut, which won't be pushing the milling cutter too hard. The total depth of cut that I need to do is about 1 1/8 inch with a 3/4 inch cutter into cast iron. I don't want to do that in one pass, so I'm going to do it in 2 passes. These are just cuts for slots for a bolt to be able to bolt it to the face. So the inner finish of the slots is not critically important. This is just something that's going to be used to hold it in place. The actual registering is going to be the inside circle. So there's quite a bit of tolerance in here, and so I'm going to be putting 3/4 inch slots in, even though the bolts are 5/8 of an inch. That'll give me a little bit of slot on either side. I had a little momentary cessation of stupidity, and I took my template, and unlike before where I balanced this on top of the clamps, I'm now able to just set it on top and check to make sure that I've got all the cuts in the right place. I've done that, and played around with it several times, because the last thing I want to do is cut these slots in the wrong place and then have to turn it again and just end up making the thing ugly. Do have room to make about 3 mistakes on this, but I'm going to try to go without making any at all. So as you can see, I cut notches in my template to clear the clamps so that it'll rest flat. And there's a scribed circle on here that I'm sure you cannot see, but I can line that up, and then I can see that my 3 holes are going to go in these 3 positions. So I want to cut a slot in there, a slot in there, and a slot in there. And I've calculated the angles. This is going to have the rotary table set at 283 degrees. This is 47 plus a little bit. This is 158 plus a little bit. So I'll be dialing the rotary table in. Actually going down to within 10 seconds on it, not because I need to, but because it's easy enough to do. And then I'll be coming in from this direction, and underneath there is a small radius. I'm coming in just to the edge of that radius. So it's going in about 1 1/8 inches more or less, which is more than what I need to clear the studs. That'll give a fair amount of room to play around with. I've got a 3/4 inch cutter on here, as I said. This is about 1 1/8 inch thick. I could cut it in one pass at risk breaking the cutter. I think I'm going to do it in 2 passes just to make things a little bit easier. It'll take twice as long, but the chances of breaking the cutter are going to be reduced by doing that. I'll get about half the load on the cutter by doing it in 2 passes. So at this point, it's just a matter of firing up the machine, lining things up, setting the DRO at 0 so that I know when to stop the feed, and going through and moving it. I've got the speed set on the spindle. I've got the feed rate set. I think everything's in place. I've got everything aligned. This is in. I've checked the clamps. They're tight. I've got the table locked at the initial cutting position, and then we can just go through and try everything out. Well, that was disappointing. The clamps are tight. I had 3 tight stops. And the part still shifted on the table. And as a result, this cut is a little bit curved. It's not exactly where I want it. It's only half depth. The front will look okay when I'm done. But I'm going to have to recenter this on the table, patch things up a little bit, and start over again. So this is going to be a little bit of a challenge to do that. It's going to take a little bit of time to get this all centered and get the stops back in place where they're doing some good. But I am a little bit disappointed. This has moved about 3/16 of an inch off the center. So apparently there's a lot of force being generated on this cutter. Even at that depth, I'm going to have to take it a lot slower to finish this off. But the first thing to do is get everything centered again, and that is kind of a nuisance, but nothing to be done about it. Let's get to it. So first thing, we'll just loosen the clamps, and in fact, just get them completely out of there. Or at least for 2 of them. Now I'm going to move things back so I can clear the cutter. It was firm up against there, so I'm going to slide it over onto those 2. Assume that one slipped as a start. Put an indicator on here. Not bad for a first try, within 2,000. And that is 1,000th all around. Still good to 1,000th. Okay, I now have this recentered. I have it clamped down. It's tight. Recalibrated the dial by lining up the end mill with the hole as carefully as I can by eye. And as I said, remember I've got about a 1/16 of an inch clearance on each side all the way around here, so getting to within a half a thousandths isn't an issue. But I do have it probably by eye within a few thousandths of being right on where it's supposed to be. This slot is a little bit curved, a little bit chewed up from the previous cut when this thing shifted. And surprisingly, it did not break the cutter on it. I did have the y-axis locked. I did have the table locked. These clamps were tight in place. The stop clamps were tight. Apparently just not tight enough, but everything's lined up again. So what I'm going to do a little bit differently this time is, instead of trying to take a little over a half an inch, I'm going to go about a 1/4 inch at a time, do these in 4 cuts. So the other thing is, I have to subtract 2 degrees off of everything. This rotated about 2 degrees, and I've set the dials so that they read exactly a 2-degree difference. It makes my arithmetic a little bit easier over here, not having to deal with the minutes and seconds. But should be in good shape to try this again, and hopefully get this right. As I said, the front of this slot will be okay. It just has a little bit of a corner taken off right here, and a little bit of a curvature in there. It's not too bad, and that won't affect the functionality of it. So let's go back and try this all again. You know, when I think back on this, one of the things that I could have done, and it's really something to consider, is machining a plug to go down in here to just sit in the center into the hole in the rotary table and keep this from shifting. And I should have thought of that before, but since I've now thought of it, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to make a little plug to sit down in there to keep this from shifting as well. And I'm going to do that off camera. So I made this plug off camera. This fits the inner bore of the housing. This fits the inner bore of the table. This is just left over from some previous job that I was using this for. And to be able to grab a hold of this and lower this down in there without smashing my fingers, I'm just going to use a base for a magnetic indicator, drop it down into place, and you know, what the heck, might as well leave it there. So at this point, I think I'm ready to go back and start cutting again. And as I said, I'm going to take shallower cuts on this and then just work my way around and hopefully not have any more crashes. So let's get to it. So I've done a trial fit on here. The slots line up. It fits on snug. There's a little bit of rust on the outside of that registering ring. I just need to file that off to get a little bit of clearance, or not really, just sand it off a little bit. But other than that, I'm lined up with the spindle. Everything looks good. The last operation is I need to find a way to get these T-nuts into this slot. And I'm going to just mill a little clearance to do that. Now when the shaper head is vertical, the T-nuts will be here. When I turn it towards the dividing head, rotating it this way, they'll move around to this position. So I want to avoid these two quadrants. I also would rather put the entry point low rather than high. So I'm just going to put down here at the minus 45 degree point on this. And this is just a matter of mounting the thing. Probably going to set it back on the table to do this, although I could do it directly onto a milling table. And just clear a little bit of clearance right in here so that I can slide these in, and then they'll be able to drop around. So I'm going to set up for that. 2 more cuts and we're done with this piece. So I've marked the housing with a Sharpie just where I want to cut. This is just going to be an eyeball cut on this. And I'm going to do it manually, no automatic feeds or anything. I've got a 1/2 inch cutter in here so I can bump the speed up. Should be able to run around 400, but the head on this mill jumps, the speeds jump from 310 up to 495. 495 is a little bit faster than what I want. So this is going to be going 310 RPM, 1/2 inch 4 flute cutter in here. Feeds are going to just be kind of eyeballed manually on it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to plunge down into the gap here and then come in and relieve a little bit on each side, kind of eyeballing up to the Sharpie lines that I have in there, and then I should be able to drop the T-nut in and have it rotate around. I might have to file the corners off of these a little bit later. We'll see once I get it in there. But for right now, I think we're ready to cut. So it's a very close fit, but what I need to do is just grind a little bit of concavity on one side of each of the T-nuts, and I think it'll work. So let me run over to the grinder and do that, and then we'll try it again. Well, that took all of about no time at all. Just ground a little bit of concavity in there. One of the nice things about having a 6-inch grinding wheel when you're trying to get something to fit a 6-inch circle, they kind of match. So we drop that in, spins around nicely. I should be able to just bolt the slotting head onto here, and I already know that it registers fine. Everything should be set. So that is a wrap on the housing. I thank everyone for watching. I don't know when I'm going to get back to making the other piece. There's a couple other things that I need to do first, but it'll come. At some point I'll have the video for part 2 and we'll be able to see the slotting head working. Until then, you all have a good time and play safe in your shops. Bye.